Hello and welcome to this edition of Thursday 30. And so we're doing this once again. Some people might remember we started this back in 2020 when everything was going virtual. And so we're starting this again as part of Deaf Awareness Month in September. So welcome for those of you joining us. My name is Sarah Roof with Kentucky Hands and Voices. And I have a child who is deaf. He's now 10. And so that's what brings me here. And one thing, we want to do with these is educate people as much as possible on what resources are available to them. So I'm excited today for the first in the series to introduce a couple of folks who we have partnered with many times. I don't know. I think Michelle has learned that I have a hard time saying no to her, maybe. I don't know. So I'm excited that people can learn about the different partnerships that we have. You have a very long title and a very long department name. So I'm going to let you introduce it so that I don't miss something or leave something out. So welcome our guests, Michelle and Anthony. And if you can just introduce yourselves.
Hi, everybody. It's so good to be here. Sarah, one of the things I love most about you is that you don't say no, because we can come up with all kinds of ways to help improve the quality of life of people who are deaf or hard of hearing and their family members. And I love that. We've had some pretty creative ideas. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but we always try together. And I love that. My name administrator for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services at, it's a long name, the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities. And I focus on making access to services and quality of services for mental health, substance use, and developmental or intellectual disabilities better for people who are deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind, or deaf disabled. So it's lot to try to do, and we can't do it without partnerships. So I'm so glad that we get to work together. And I'm super excited because we just celebrated the 1-year anniversary of Anthony joining our team. So Anthony, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, hello everyone. My name is Anthony Adkins, and I'm the program coordinator for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services. And I am responsible for sharing information about language access and scheduling, coordinating interpreters for that access.
A lot of the work we do is breaking down barriers and trying to see where barriers exist for families. And I really appreciate the work, Sarah, that you do on that too, because you see a barrier and you're like, nope, this isn't going to happen for my son or for other families.
Make it work, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So again, like you said, partnerships are crucial. And Michelle and I guess, first met by serving on the advisory board for Kentucky's Early Hearing Detection and Intervention Program. I think that's how we first met. And we'll talk about one of the first projects, I guess, we started partnering on that came up in one of those advisory board meetings. But the very first thing I want to talk about today is let me make sure I get it right, the dinner table project, right? So I've got my box here. And so I want you to talk about this. What is this about, right? So it's a little cardboard box, and we can make these available to families that are interested. But I'll see if I can kind of zoom in a little bit, but talk about this. So what's this all about? Because this is a brand new project that you all are doing.
It is. So Dinner Table Project was started by our regional prevention centers across the state. And the idea is that for any family, sitting together and having a meal helps to reduce the risk of substance use or mental health issues. And so they started off saying, hey, how can we encourage families to eat together? And I was watching and knew that for families who have a child who's deaf or hard of hearing, or a parent who has hearing loss, that communication breakdown can really cause problems, and that child or adult can feel really isolated. It actually can cause something called dinner table syndrome. And it's the idea of somebody saying, oh, we'll tell you later, or maybe it's a 2-hour conversation and then somebody summarizes it in 5 minutes. And that really has long-term implications for kids. So Anthony and I partnered with our prevention centers to create the boxes as kind of a first step. So Anthony, do you want to talk about what's on the boxes?
Sure. And I actually have a box here as well. On the front of the box, at the bottom, it has a description about the project. And on the other side, you'll see meals. And it also has some pictures along with it. And on the side, it gives tips on how you can help a deaf and hard of hearing individual develop. And we got all the information from our resources that are here in the area. And then we have quote boxes, and it has different conversation starter ideas, how you can start a conversation with your child at the dinner table. So there's several tips here.
So the idea of the boxes is that many times people sit on their tablets or their phones, and they don't actually look at each other and talk. So you can take your phone and put it in the box and close the box. But the box itself provides resources like those conversation starters, or it gives you the ideas on what are called protective factors, what's going to help prevent substance use or mental health issues for those kids. And the protective factors are things like knowledge of the resources, connections to other people, an identity for a kid who's deaf or hard of hearing. Where do they fit? Do they fit in the deaf world, the hearing world, the hard of hearing world? How do they develop that identity? Also, solid communication. It's absolutely essential to have that solid communication. And we know that with hands and voices, we know that what makes the choice right is what's right for that child and what's right for that family. And so we really try to take an unbiased approach and provide a breadth of resources, because some families may sign, some may speak, some may do both. And so the boxes are designed to help recognize that and to recognize the diversity in deaf or hard of hearing communities.
Yeah, I love it. So I think with nowadays, families are so busy. And so you really have to be intentional about finding that time. I mean, like dinner table, how many families even have the opportunity to sit down and have, dinner together? But I love this, that it gives some some ideas and just encourages families to just slow down, be intentional, have that time of communication and connecting with one another. I will say, so I'm like most parents of children who are deaf or hard of hearing, right? I'm in that 90% plus category where we're hearing parents, first deaf child, we had to figure a lot of things out. And so really didn't know a lot of deaf people. And I love this because I can remember one time I was on a panel with a deaf adult. Okay. And she was sharing her experience growing up. And she talked about holiday times, how they would be, as a family, she was the only deaf member, and they would all be gathered around the table. And she said she dreaded holiday time because that communication where, family members just did not take the time to draw her in and include her. And I just remember for me, hearing that, I mean, it was very sad, right? Because usually you want to get excited about holidays and family time together. And I mean, she even talked about once she got older, she just didn't want to even go. Like she elected not to go at all. And so, it made me as that parent realize there are so many things that I wouldn't have thought of, raising a deaf child, and things that I need to think of a little bit differently. Another, reason why it's important to have deaf adults in our lives that we can learn from. We'll talk about that a little bit more too. But I think this just kind of brings that home of really, connecting with your child and giving you some ideas to do that. Something as simple as around the dinner table.
Well, and it breaks my heart to know that it's more typical for a person who is deaf to be left out than to be included. And so we're trying to be strategic and thoughtful about how do we ask people who are adults, who are deaf, to share their experiences, but not to make that a sad experience for them.
Sure.
And so one project we're also looking at in connection, the Dinner Table Project has a website. And so we can upload videos, we can upload other things. So look for the fall. We don't have it ready. I was hoping it'll be ready for today, but we are going to encourage people to make videos of cooking with their families or
Awesome.
eating with their families. So what's a recipe your family likes? How do you communicate that recipe to each other? Or maybe two parents in the family are hard of hearing. What do you do in the kitchen so that you can understand each other when you're not always making eye contact? So we want to build on the Dinner Table Project and give people quality tips for how to avoid creating that cycle, because we want people to feel included and to have that sense of belonging that's so important.
I love it. I think that's, yeah, it's great. So anything, to kind of foster communication and connection, especially some things, again, as hearing parents that we don't always just think about, that it's good to slow down and take those times to connect. So anything else you all want to say about the Dinner Table Project or the boxes?
I'm just excited, and I hope that people watching today will think about ideas too, and there'll be ways to contact us. So please reach out if you have ideas to expand the project. Regional prevention centers are all across the state, and they often partner with the extension offices. So they'll even have like a Taco Tuesday, and families can come to the extension office, learn how to make tacos together, eat tacos, and chat. So there's all kinds of opportunities for partnering, possibly with our guides, the Guide by Your Side program. We also partner with KSD Outreach so that families of children who are at KSD or who are in mainstream programs could work with us. We actually distributed the boxes at the orientation for KSD and at the zoo. I've got my
Yes,
shirt.
if we had families who were at Deaf Awareness Day at the zoo in August, I know, there were some families that took the boxes then, and just connect with us. We can find ways to make the boxes available. Our guides will be having them at some of their local outreach events that they do. You talked a little bit, Michelle, about protective factors. Okay. So, and the boxes. So let's talk about protective factors a little bit. And that's really, I think, where our partnership was born. We were in an advisory board meeting, like I mentioned, and you started talking about parent cafes. So let's talk about the parent cafe model. And then, maybe how we've done that over the years, because we've been doing those for several years now. So talk about parent cafes.
Sure. So it feels like a long time ago when we started that.
Yes.
I remember sitting in a meeting, and it was about early hearing detection and intervention. And there were actually two committees that got to work together. One focused on medical and audiology interventions, and then one was family support. And I so appreciate that Hands and Voices is literally at the table or on the Zoom, making sure that families are always at the forefront and are represented there. So a protective factor is something that is going to help prevent a mental health issue or a substance use issue from developing. What's going to help a child thrive? And so there's a program called Kentucky Strengthening Families, and they were offering parent cafes across the state. And it was the idea that if we got parents together, sometimes just saying, come to a support group. They're like, no, I would rather watch television
Right.
or take a walk or sleep. It didn't really work. But when we brought people together in more of a structured format and helped give them some guided questions, they could start thinking about, what are they doing right? What are the things that are helping? And it was a much more strengths-based approach to talking about families and talking with families, but then also giving information. So protective factors include knowledge of resources, knowledge of child development. What should I expect from a 5-year-old? Communication with, feeling connection to community. And so the parent cafes are usually about 2 hours long, and they were opportunities for parents to come together, usually with either a snack or a meal. And then the kids are in a different room.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Childcare,
and childcare.
very important. And it was sad to me that some of the parents like, this is almost like a date because they got to have like 2 hours
Right,
talking to each
right.
other and the kids
Kids were in the
somewhere
next
else.
room, but
Exactly.
yeah.
So we started off, I think our first big one was in Northern Kentucky,
Yes.
and we did a series of 4 so that we could cover the protective factors, like 2 protective factors each time. When we do a deaf or hard of hearing group, always focus on communication as one of those protective factors because we know that's a foundation. So within those 2 hours, the parents come, they drop their kids off. The kids have childcare with, could be a U of L audiology student. It could be a deaf adult in the community. We partner with Kentucky School for the Deaf Outreach, whoever we can get who wants to help support these families. And then during those 2 hours, parents have a chance to talk. And we took the questions that were from general parent cafes, and some of those questions were great, and parents wanted to talk about them. But what we found was that parents really wanted to talk about the unique experience of raising a child who was deaf or hard of hearing. And so, Sarah, your team was amazing in helping to develop the questions, and we creating individual sections. Look at those awesome cards.
Yes. So like Michelle said, yep, we kind of came up with some questions that were specific because you're right. I remember going to that Northern Kentucky one, and I think there's something about being in a room of other parents. So many parents haven't done that before, where they're in a room of parents of other kids, who are deaf or hard of hearing. Like, it's just a unique experience to be able to connect with those parents on what it's like raising a child who is deaf or hard of hearing. So
I'm thinking about one family that particular, they had a teenager, and I was surprised to see him walk in the door. It was the first time, even though it was a teenager, that they'd ever met other parents raising kids who were hard of hearing. And the teen was not that thrilled to be there day one. She kind of sat back. But by the 3rd time, she was right there on the floor playing with the kids. And the kids thought that was so cool because they could see an older teen wearing a hearing aid. Yeah. And they could see that she was happy and successful and thriving in her high school. And that connection and that role modeling is so important. And so when we first started, I would facilitate them, but I'm not a parent of a child who's deaf or hard of hearing. So I think a key factor was then training your guides, so that the guides became the people leading and facilitating those meetings. And so we've done trainings on the state level and on the national level to take the parent cafes out to the country. So that's been a really fun project together.
Yeah, it has been. And so we do have our parent guides. Many of them are trained in facilitating parent cafes. So of course, initially when we started on, like you mentioned, Northern Kentucky, I don't even remember what year that was, 2018, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, so when we were first doing them, we were doing them all in person, right? And so bringing families together and using this model, and we had trained our guides. Well, then what happened, right? Like COVID happened, 2020 happened. But we wanted to find a way to still connect with parents and still give them the opportunity to have these conversations. So that's when we're like, surely we can figure out how to do this on Zoom. Everybody's connecting on Zoom during 2020. So in 2020, we did start doing a series of parent cafes virtually. We haven't done one in a while, but we're always open to it. So like if somebody has, if you're in a location and you're like, hey, this sounds really cool, can you come to my city? The answer is yes, we can make that work. So, because we do have parent guides throughout the state. So we can certainly do one in person or virtually. We've done some, like one of our parent guides is specific to CMV, cytomegalovirus, which many of our families are impacted by. So we've done like CMV specific parent cafes. One time we did one, I remember it was back to school parent cafe, because there's so many questions about, advocacy and what does my child need within the school. So sometimes we'll do like a specific theme, but they are very unique. I know one time I was at one, I think we were in Lexington, and some parents came, and after the fact, they were like, I really had no idea what I was coming to, but this was great. Like having the facilitated discussion, but at the same time, the ability to just talk about all kinds of topics that have impacted them, whether their child is like birth to 3 ages or, elementary school, preschool, middle school, high school. I mean, they all have different issues at each stage, but it's neat to see like the older parents provide some insight to the younger parents, or the younger parents explain what they're going through, and then have other parents in a similar stage share it too, like, you're not alone. So I think that's the great part about the parent cafes.
There's a magic, I think, that happens too. I'm thinking about one we did in Louisville, and at the beginning we do an icebreaker, which most people hate, but it's not that bad. But people dread it, and then they actually enjoy it. And it turned out that we ended up with a table of grandparents raising grandchildren, a table of parents who had kids with a unilateral hearing loss, another group of like really young ones. They kind of self-selected. Somehow there was a magic, and they found each other. And in a world where it can feel really isolating and alone, having that connection is so critical. So I hope that now that in-person's starting and we have virtual opportunities, we can partner again to do more parent cafes across the state.
Yeah, we're happy to reintroduce those. And so kind of like the Thursday 30, hopefully we can bring the parent cafes back, because I know our parents always really enjoy that. And you mentioned Michelle's kind of gone nationwide. So I know she's taken this and done trainings in other states of, Hands and Voices chapters that have been very interested in this, because it is just a unique way to connect families while also addressing those protective factors. And so last thing we want to talk about is, we've talked about connection and communication and protective factors. And so I guess our most recent project partnership that we have worked on is called LACES. And so talk about that, you guys. What is that, and what does that look like? Who's it for, and the importance of it?
Sure. So LACES is a super exciting project. The acronym stands for language, access, communication, empowerment, and support. And we were able to partner with Aetna Better Health of Kentucky. They are a managed care organization. They do the insurance for all children who are in out-of-home care. So kids who are in foster care, kinship care, or facilities. And what we were seeing was that kids who were deaf or hard of hearing would get lost in the system. And when we first started, and we were partnering with the Commission on the Deaf and Hard of Hearing and with our Department for Community-Based Services, they didn't even know how many kids there were. And so we started off doing kind of data collection, which is boring, but important to figure out where these kids are. And then Shelley Mann with Aetna was like, hey, let's add some services. What can we do to make sure these kids don't get lost? And so we created what's called a value added benefit. And so these kids are eligible for LACES. They can have a screening on their communication skills. And then with that screening comes an expert in children who are deaf or hard of hearing, who can go into the home and provide up to 20 hours of support, helping to implement communication strategies. Because a lot of foster parents have no idea, right? It's hard enough if it's a biological parent and you've had this steep learning curve. If a child's removed from the home and placed somewhere, then they may not know what they're getting into. They're like, oh, well, the hearing aids are on, everything's fine now. Or the hearing aid starts to beep and they're like, what? Right. So there's a huge learning curve. So we wanted there to be some kind of connection for that communication. And then we also don't want the deaf or hard of hearing child to have the burden of teaching the foster families about deaf culture, about their communication needs. So you guys stepped up in an amazing way so that we could have Guide by Your Side or deaf or hard of hearing guides come into the home. So they can provide support in person, by text, by phone, by Zoom, so that these families have somewhere to go, someone to talk to if they have questions like, how do I include a child in a swim party? What do I do with the cochlear implant? How do I communicate if they take their cochlear implant off and my kid zoomed across the park? How do I handle that?
Yeah.
So it's been an interesting partnership. We're learning as we go, and we're really hoping that we can expand it statewide in different ways, because we know that all kids who are deaf or hard of hearing need that access to communication from birth. That 0 to 5 language window is so important. And we know that for kids who are deaf or hard of hearing, that those deaf role models or hard of hearing role models are so important. And it was fun because we could take your superheroes, your DHH superheroes, and some of them became our guides.
Right.
But we also found other people across the state. So it's been fun to expand that. I'm looking forward to Anthony getting more involved and being at some of the events too, now that it's safer to be together again.
Yeah. So like Michelle mentioned, this is kind of a pilot project for kiddos who are in the foster care system. Our hope is to expand it where we would have DHH guides where families could elect to have the support of a DHH guide as well. Because, like I mentioned in the story earlier, I think there's so much we can learn. As a hearing parent, I don't have that experience of being deaf that I can share with my son, right? Like there's things he's going to experience that I will never experience. And so I think to learn from the experiences of deaf and hard of hearing adults is so crucial for parents to embrace. But this project, again, like you said, is unique. Michelle and I know we presented at a conference earlier this year about it nationally, I think the foster system, there's so many needs. I'll mention one other unique thing that we've just started. Michelle said we're learning as we go, and we truly are on this pilot project. And so another interesting part of that we're doing is partnering a parent guide along with the DHH guide. So again, a foster parent takes in a child, and there is a steep learning curve, so much to learn. And so one of our parent guides has experience with the foster care system, so she can provide that level of support as a parent who understands the foster care system, but who also understands the ins and outs of a deaf child, and then of course help facilitate that relationship with the DHH guide as well. And some of that could just be coming to our events, like we do a lot of fun events. And so it could be that you can meet up with the DHH guide at an event. They can come to your home, provide support virtually. So, we don't have a ton of DHH guides right now. So depending on the location, it might just be a virtual thing, but looking forward to seeing the future of that project and hopefully it expanding. So yeah.
I think it's what is the next right thing to do? Like, and we've always been out together. Like, okay, now there's COVID. What's the next that we do? Okay, now there's this need that we've identified. What's the next right thing to do? And I know that there are people watching who are really interested in improving the lives, not only of their own kids, but of all kids who are deaf or hard of hearing in the state. If you are motivated by that and you have a child who has received mental health services, we would love to be in touch. We actually have a vacancy on our advisory committee right now. We have an advisory committee that meets 4 times a year to focus on improving services. And the vacancy now is for a parent of a child receiving services. So if you're interested in that, reach out to me or reach out to Sarah or Anthony, and we can help you through that application process, because it really is about partnership. It shouldn't be somebody in Frankfurt making decisions for anybody. It shouldn't be, any one parent holding all of the knowledge. Everybody has their own unique skills and knowledge. The more we can connect to each other, the more we can create that environment that's going to help everybody thrive.
All right, awesome. Well, again, we thank you for your partnership, Michelle, Anthony. I can't wait to figure out the next thing that you all wrote me into with Kentucky Hands and Voices. I'll probably say yes, right? Because we've had such a great partnership and just finding creative ways to serve families, because that's what it's about at the end of the day. Like, what can we do to improve services, provide resources for our families? And, you all obviously have a very unique perspective on what you work with and deal with. And so it's always great to educate families that you are a resource available, and even some more of the specific ways that we partner with you all. So thank you for taking the time. And we'll, of course, post contact information if anybody has questions, and you can post questions that we will respond to as well, or you can email them to any of us and that will be included. So thank you for joining us today.